In the history of bad games, there is one arcade-to-home conversion that stands as one of the worst ever. And no, I'm not talking about E.T., that was not an arcade game. I'm talking about Pac-Man for the Atari 2600. In this video, I will attempt to make the case that Pac-Man for the Atari 2600 is not as bad as it's made out to be, why it wasn't like the original arcade game, and that it is actually a fun and successful game for Atari. So in 1980, the arcade game Pac-Man was taking arcades by storm, and it was a huge hit for its parent company Namco. Atari had a strong relationship with Namco, as evidenced by games such as Pole Position, Dig Dug, Xevious, and Rolling Thunder appearing in arcades under the Atari banner. So it was no surprise that Atari could so easily nab a license for one of their biggest games, Pac-Man, to appear on the Atari 2600. Tod Frye was tasked with creating the Atari 2600 port, but there were a few stipulations. First, he had only 4 months to code the game. Also, he wasn't given any reference material about the game, and the only thing that he had in order to make the game was an arcade system for him to play and learn from. Another stipulation is that in order to keep costs down, it could only be made in 4K, or kilobytes. In fact, here is the whole game code in binary. Considering that the original game is more than 4 times larger than that, it means that Tod had to create some really efficient code. And let's not forget the speed of the Atari 2600 processor, which is about 3 times slower than that of the original arcade. The other requirement is that the background couldn't be black because Atari had only allowed space games to have a black background. This was to limit the number of games that could cause CRT image burn. So Tod chose a blue background instead, which meant that the originally blue maze had to be changed. Next was Pac-Man himself. In the arcade game, he was a simple yellow ball that ate dots. But in the Atari 2600 version, they tried to give him a bit more character with an eye and fanciful images in the manual. Honestly, that never bothered me, and I really enjoyed seeing Pac-Man as a more realized character. Because of sprite limitations with the Atari 2600 hardware, the enemies that chase Pac-Man, Inky, Pinky, Blinky, and Clyde, were changed from monsters into ghosts. And to this day, more people call them ghosts than monsters, I think partly because of this game and partly because they look like ghosts. The maze layout is much different than the arcade game. Again, as a way of fitting within the memory constraints, much of the maze is duplicated and the tunnel was moved from the sides to the top. Overall, this is the change that bothers me the most. The layout is kind of dull and repetitive, and there's not many long stretches of dashes to eat. Oh, did I say dashes? Yes, the dots were changed into dashes, or wafers as they call them in the manual. I especially like the mega wafers in the middle of the screen. The bonus fruit was changed to a simple vitamin pill, and power pellets were changed to yellow squares instead of circles. Well, those may be the thing that changed the least, actually. Next, let's talk about the sounds. They're so ear-gratingly bad. I mean, they're so cute and fanciful that I just want to hear them in every TV show and movie that has video games in them ever since 1982.
So much for your cat-like reflexes.
It is kind of funny how the sounds from this game have appeared in so many different movies and TV shows over the past 30 years, isn't it? Anyway, the starting song is like 2 notes. It's kind of cute, and I guess little kids would probably like it. The bonking sound of eating the wafers it's not good. It's not good. I guess I should be grateful that Tod didn't try to replicate the siren sound. Could you imagine trying to listen to that while playing this game? Basically, the sounds aren't great, but you know, they're there. They're something. They're fun. They're exciting, right? They're great. As for the gameplay, well, it's mostly the same. You guide Pac-Man around a maze, avoiding enemies while eating wafers and power pellets to complete the stage. But one huge difference though is when you eat a power pellet, the ghosts don't run away. That made it a heck of a lot easier for a little kid like me, and I appreciated the easier difficulty. Scoring is also different, which means you couldn't compare your score to what you got in the arcade game. But who really cares? You're going to compare the scores from the 2600 version with the kids at school anyway, right? So what I'm trying to get at here is that Pac-Man for the 2600 is not really a bad game. At face value, it's pretty fun, especially considering all the limitations that Tod Frye had to overcome. The reason that most people criticize the game is because it's not like the original arcade game, and truthfully, there was no way that was going to happen on this hardware back in the day. Now, of course, 35 some odd years of coding experience has created new versions of Pac-Man, even in 4K, that look more like the original game, but again, you have to consider the time that the game was made. But I say critics be darned, because it is the best-selling Atari 2600 game, and it has sold over 7 million copies. Sure, 5 million were left unsold, but let's not talk about that. Let's just say that I didn't see too many copies of the game in the famous Alamogordo landfill photos that came out a few years ago. Did you? So I hope I've made the case that Pac-Man for the 2600 isn't really bad, it's just different. But what do you think about the game? Did it ruin your childhood? Did you cry because it wasn't exactly like the arcade game? Or did you enjoy it for what it was, a simplified version of the original that was fun in its own way? Let me know down in the comments. And if you're interested in learning more about how Pac-Man came to be, check out the panels with Tod Frye linked below in the description. Thank you for watching, take care, and we'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.